I actually wrote Ecstasy Club in reaction to a book I had written before that called Siberia. And it's hard to discuss one without the other. Siberia was a nonfiction, if slightly gonzo, meaning Hunter Thompson-esque descent into the psychedelic revival of, late 80s, early 90s West Coast. So I was looking at the similarity and resonance between a lot of different cultural moments and cultural developments. And that was everything from the advance of fantasy role-playing games and video games, rave culture, chaos math and fractals, psychedelic culture, electronic music, revived interest in Timothy Leary and the Beats, the industrial music scene. I really saw there being a kind of a mass cultural movement towards what I was calling designer reality. It seemed that a lot of different people were having fun improvising reality instead of just, going to the movies and watching someone else's tape. It looked like there were a lot of experiments, sort of collaborative experiments in worlds that were kind of hypertextual and nonlinear, and that the sense of satisfaction in these realms came from making connections and seeing resonances and finding parallels, drawing frames around things by going meta. Everyone was talking about going meta on things, recontextualizing things. So there were all of these very... and whatever world you were in, they all seemed the same. People in movies making strange movies that move time around or speed things up. We were talking about Koyaanisqatsi the other day, which is a very cosmic sort of thing. Everybody was reading Dancing Woolly Masters and having these real trippy visions on what this meant, what it meant to the world that we live in. So I wrote this book, Siberia, looking at the most optimistic of these hypertextual, psychedelic, rave-influenced, fractal-loving explorers. These were the kids from Mondo 2000, the kids hanging out with Timothy Leary down in L.A., Terrence McKenna, Genesis P. Orridge, the Psychic TV Tribes, some of the weirdest people in Austin, Rose X Media. They were dropping DMT and then making quick Atari toaster videos while they were high. Just wild stuff. And I wrote about it in the most optimistic, open-minded way, because here I am, this East Coast person working for a major East Coast publisher, coming out and trying to introduce the East Coast to what was about to come at them from the West Coast. To say, computers are coming, you're going to use email someday, you might have something called a CD-ROM, your kids might play something called video games, all this stuff is coming, and the way the people who play with this stuff interact with reality is different. They see reality as something that can be hacked, something that can be designed, rather than something that you just submit to and make the most of. And I needed to say it and express it in the most gentle, optimistic way, because the East Coast was already so closed-minded to all of this. Oh, we went through that in the 60s, now we're in the Reagan years, what are you bothering me with this? After I had written it, and then all the stuff eventually happens. The internet comes, and Rave comes, and the whole electronic thing comes, and it becomes almost so boosterized, if you will. It becomes so self-indulgent. In other words, the rave kids start, chanting for the spaceship to come down. When I would go to raves and kids were going, contact, contact, thinking that the thing is really, that tonight's the night it's really going to come, because it says on the rave flyer that we're going to make contact tonight, or I saw on this tape, and that they think it's now is it. This sort of, even if it's a happy apocalyptic mindset, that there's this sense that we are going to evolve the human species by taking E and going to a warehouse and dancing together till 4 a.m. This is it. even though we go back to our job at the advertising agency the next day and come up with, strategies that are supposed to get Gen Y kids buying more deodorant that they don't yet need because they're only 12. What's that? So I wrote Ecstasy Club later. This was a few years later. It was sort of right after Jerry Garcia died that I decided to write this thing and look at what was the failing of the neo-psychedelic movement? What was the failing of the rave movement? Why didn't it really change things? And the reason it didn't is because it was solipsistic. It was turned inward. It was not... It lost what the 60s had that was important, an important feature, and a character who represents that ends up just disappearing in the book, is that connection to sort of Grateful Dead era culture, that we're getting high not just to change our consciousness, reach this other state, and then use the secret to somehow, through quantum physics, change reality, but rather go out, join the Peace Corps, go into government, go into social action, go into social service. What are we going to do to actually, on the ground, change the world? Bush, Reagan, whoever it is, they're more than happy to have us have psychedelic experiences and then blog for one another about them, right? What they don't want is us taking to streets and actually making a change, creating civic involvement, actually getting involved in a real way, finding out what's going on, marching. That's what they want to avoid. So Ecstasy Club looks at what would have happened if Rave had continued along the path that was going. What if it was really allowed? What if you could join the ultimate rave club and go as far out as you wanted to go and experience the time travel that everybody was talking about? And where I took them in that was really into hype and spin. That the idea of the book finally is that the way you travel into the future is by hyping the future, telling everyone what's going to happen. The way you travel into the past is by spinning the past, spinning what happened. And it can all be based on that party. We're going to have this party. It's going to be the great one where we're going to actually touch the thing and be there. Then the party happens and people have whatever their real experience of it was. And afterwards, all you have to do if you're the promoter of the party is say, well, that was the one. There was this moment at 2:30 in the morning when the whole crowd and we were all there and we touched it. We were there. So that's the way time travel really works, is through this kind of storytelling of the future and the past. And DMT in the book ends up becoming a programming tool. That the guy who runs this Ecstasy Club cult, and really it's funny, a lot of different rave posses wrote to me saying, "You were writing about our rave posse, weren't you? That was our..." Because they thought they were the only one who had some shamanic figure sort of running the thing and a girl who was like this. They were actually, in most rave posses, people ended up assuming very stereotypical roles. There was sort of the girl who mixes the smart drinks, the guy who was sort of in charge of the money and the cops, and the person who was in charge of this. They all kind of had these caricatured identities that somehow came out through whatever those interactions and drug use just tended towards these archetypes, I suppose. But the cult leader in this group, when he wants to solidify group cohesion and get people to follow him more, he does a DMT session. And it's during the moment of re-entry that he exploits. There's a sort of window of opportunity, and he uses that to make it seem as if he is the source of whatever that person's experience was. Because you are, in psychedelic states, they are vulnerable states. Maybe not the euphoric part is not the vulnerable part, but where you're trying to piece it all back together, and the person who guides you in that can if they choose to, can have a great influence on how you reassemble, your parts.